Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this evening's local interest talk hosted by FOLIO Sutton Coldfield. What I really want to do now is give a very warm welcome to this evening's speaker, who's Stella Thebridge, and she's head of heritage at Holy Trinity Church. And I'm particularly delighted to welcome her because she was our first speaker in this series of online talks about Sutton Coldfield. Back in January this year. Stella in January, what she did is she talked about the history of the building of Holy Trinity. And tonight, I'm really delighted that she's going to be talking about some of the people associated with the building. So without further ado, I can hear you all rising and giving Stella a very warm round of applause to welcome her. And I shall hand over to Stella. Thank you, Stella.
Well, thank you very much. It's a delight to be here again. And I've never been called head of heritage before. I'm just the person that sort of deals with the history inquiries now, really, for Holy Trinity Church. And the thing with this system of webinars is that I have absolutely no idea who's in the audience. I think I've seen the number of 19 people or something. So anyway, hello everyone. If you know me, then you know I am Stella Thebridge and what I do. If you don't, it's very nice to have you here with us this evening and perhaps learning something new about this wonderful church in the centre of Sutton. What I wanted to talk about tonight was just a few of the people associated with the church who, of course, were often very involved with the town as a whole, and just some of the more interesting stories around them that we've gleaned from the past. The way we've gathered information, of course, has usually been around. I'm looking for my arrow now. Where's it gone? Here we are. Around things like records that exist around people. So people like the rectors and so on. We've got this wonderful rectors board which gives us the dates of all of them in the middle of the screen there. But we have to rely on very often the memorials in the church and outside it in the churchyard itself to just sort of tease out stories sometimes of who has been involved with the church. And these two characters here I'm going to be mentioning later on. Let's see if you recognise them when we get them. So some of the memorials obviously are on gravestones, and this picture is in because it shows the gravestones still in place around the church, which were removed in 1950. And then we also have, of course, where they are now, which is this top right picture here, removed to the perimeter wall. I put this picture up again. I know some of you have seen it before because it's an artist's impression of what the church might have looked like inside in 1850. But the reason for putting it up again is that at this point there was no stained glass in the church. There had been possibly much earlier, but at this point there wasn't any. And the very first window was that one that you can see here at the back of this picture, which was put in 1865, and I'll be mentioning that later too because of the person it was dedicated to. And this little photo here is just to show you what it looks like. One of the memorials. This is actually to one of the curates at the church for many years, and it's a very typical Victorian I don't know, diamond lozenge, I'm not sure what they call them, a tile really, and we have a number of those in the church inside. So that's just to give you a flavour of some of the ways we find, get information. The other way, of course, is later on through press cuttings, some of which are about events or people, and sometimes legal proceedings. Mary Ashford's death, of course, is a very famous one that is well recorded. I'm not going into that tonight because, again, there's been so much about that already. So the next one that I just want to show you here in relation to the memorials is the north aisle as it was before we reordered the church with the old pews in it, the Victorian pews. So this aisle was added by the Victorians, and what they did was to remove the stones at the back that you can just see there, the memorial plaques, from the wall that would have been along this side, which was the original exterior wall, from the Vesey Isle extension. They put all those plaques, instead of putting them on the outside wall here, they put them at the back this end and the one that would be behind you. And so, of course, since the reordering, those have now gone in behind the sink in the kitchen, which isn't hugely beautiful, but at least, and some of them got misplaced slightly anyway, originally when the Victorians did this. So it's just to show you how things change constantly within the building anyway. And we have to sort of glean information as we can find it from looking at the names of all these people. And I just left this one in the Ray Naden Memorial from the late 1930s. He was a town clerk. And it was this was on the end of the pew, as you can just see it here. And this is now where it is in situ in the southwest corner, with one of these old pews preserved, so that we've still got a record of it, if you will. So to tonight and who we're going to talk to, I've got sort of two parts really. The first is 4 sections on members of the clergy associated with the church. So those are sort of little titles, teasers really, which I will go into in due course. And the second section will be on various parishioners, who again I've divided into 4 categories of varying length, including my bigwigs, which I like to refer to some of the well-known names. I should just say before we carry on that Marion Baxter and Eileen Donohoe and various other people locally have done a tremendous amount of work on the memorials of lesser known people, and I don't want to steal their thunder, so I'm not talking about those people tonight, because I don't want to. They're going to sort of produce their research in due course. So this is much more about people that we've got some information about already and have had for a while, if you like. So to start with our 15th century miracle, this is actually the rector, who was rector of Holy Trinity from 1504 to 16, so incredibly early. And he was born around 1480. And this is the whole point of of including him tonight. John Taylor was actually the oldest of 3 boy triplets. So he had brothers Roland and Nathaniel, and they were born in 1480, we think. In Barton under Needwood up in Staffordshire, and their father worked in some capacity in the forest there, that, you know, Cannock Chase and so on, and which Old Chase included Sutton, the whole area. And these boys survived their birth, which was most unusual. And Henry VII was out hunting, and whether he got lost or whatever, but he was advised of the presence of these triplets in the vicinity, and sort of paid them a visit, and was very taken with the fact that all 3 boys had survived. And so he promised that if they survived infancy and got to teenage years, he would pay for their education, which he duly did. And all 3 of them got doctorates in different subjects. And John, the oldest, had a doctorate in canon law from the University of Ferrara in Italy in 1500, became a priest in 1503, and then was presented by Henry VII, who was still the monarch at that point, to the living at Holy Trinity. Subsequently, he became Archdeacon of Derby, and he also had ambassadorial missions and went to the field of Cloth of Gold with Henry VIII in 1520, as did, of course, Bishop Vesey, of whom we know very much more. So John Taylor was they all did very well, but John Taylor has a particular connection to us. And there's a suggestion that the bounty to triplets, the monarchs, or the royal bounty, began with Henry VII. I'm not sure how much in the intervening years it happened, but Victoria certainly reinstated it. And of course, it then fizzled out in the 20th century, I think, when so many multiple births were happening successfully. They couldn't afford to keep that up. So John, in gratitude in later years, gave the church at Barton under Needwood, the new building, in grateful thanks for the lives that they'd had, these 3 brothers. And his coat of arms, which apparently includes 3 babies' heads and 2 Tudor roses, is in various parts of the church. So I just thought that's rather a nice little story that I only sort of uncovered in doing research more recently, and didn't realise that, you know, there was this connection with Holy Trinity. The second section is the rector who fled. This is Anthony Burgess. Now, there was his predecessor was called John Burgess, and apparently it was no relation, but both of them were known for their preaching, which was somewhat inflammatory at times. And Burgess spanned the period of the Civil War and Protectorate, coming in 1635 to Sutton, which was a Puritan or parliamentarian stronghold, if you like, and he was a chaplain in Cromwell's New Model Army, apparently. And come 1642, and things were looking a bit iffy, Crown, he apparently fled, is how Norman Evans describes it, and went in fact to Coventry, and stayed there until about 1647, and when he must have thought it was safe to return. In 1662, of course, the new prayer book came in, and he didn't like that very much either, because he had he had more Catholic leanings. He didn't want this new Protestant, if you like, prayer book, and so he retired to Tamworth. But I shall explain more about that in due course. John Hackett, who was the bishop at the time, was hoping he would conform to the new prayer book, but he wouldn't. So off he went. So that's Anthony Burgess. My third example of someone who caused a bit of a stir is Henry Sacheverell. I've found his picture at last. And he was very, very famous because he was known as a preacher and a travelling preacher, if you like. And he was stirring up people to the Jacobite cause. So these were people who did not want George I on the throne. They wanted the half-brother of the previous monarch, Queen Anne, and this was James Francis Edward Stuart. They wanted him on the throne. And so there were riots for a long, long period all over the UK. And Henry himself had actually been imprisoned in 1710 for inciting riots down in London. And he came to preach at Holy Trinity, at which point apparently there were 200 Birmingham partisans, as they are described, at that sermon. And it is thought that this actually contributed to the riots in Birmingham just after the coronation. At the Birmingham riots, shout apparently went up, "Kill the old rogue," that's King George, "kill them all, Sacheverell forever." So he was really quite a stirrer. But the other interesting connection with that name, Henry Sacheverell, is with George Sacheverell of Newhall in Sutton, who was a part of Holy Trinity and actually had a vault constructed in the southwest corner, which is still there. And above it is this memorial here in the middle here. You can see the death's head at the bottom there, which is really quite gruesome. Poor old George Sacheverell could trace his roots back to the Norman conquest, and very much wanted to have a family vault for all his descendants. But he died without any children. And when he realized this was going to happen, he asked his nephew to take on the name Sacheverell. So he became Charles Sacheverell Chadwick. But he too died childless. So very sadly, the line sort of ended there. So this quite large vault only has 5 coffins in it. So yes, rather sad. You can't make the the legacy happen always. I've put the pulpit in there just because that is the pulpit from. No, is it the pulpit from? Actually, it might not be. I might be wrong there because this was 1714. So I've put the pulpit in, but it probably wasn't the same one. So let's draw a veil over that. I apologise, that came in later. Okay, and my sort of final section on the clergy is around various people who were bishops. And only 2 rectors have gone on to be bishops from Holy Trinity. One was John Arundel, who left as rector in 1431 and subsequently became Bishop of Chichester. He didn't go straight into that role. And then in 2004, James Langstaff left to become Bishop of Lynn, which is King's Lynn in Norfolk. And subsequently, he actually became Bishop of Rochester, and he has now just retired, in fact, back to Birmingham. So there's a connection with those two bishops only, really, of the church. But of course, the other famous one is John Vesey, who was a native of Sutton, although he was Bishop of Exeter. And so we have in the Vesey Chapel this bishop's window with 4 panels, who actually commemorates Arundel and Vesey. And then we also have Hackett and Fleetwood. Now, Hackett I mentioned earlier in connection with Anthony Burgess. Hackett was Bishop of Lichfield after the Civil War, and this is him down here. Lichfield was a royalist stronghold, so the cathedral was damaged, and he helped to restore it afterwards. This is his tomb, which is actually in I think the south aisle of Lichfield Cathedral. It's quite a grand one. But Fleetwood was actually offered the job at Holy Trinity in 1642. So this links back, I think, to Anthony Burgess, who, as we said before, fled then, and presumably because the Crown still had the living, was appointing the rectors. Charles I decided that James Fleetwood would be a good appointment, but James Fleetwood had other ideas and probably thought this wasn't a good move at that point, so he declined it, which is why there wasn't really anybody until Burgess came back again. But Fleetwood then went on to other parishes and finally became Bishop of Worcester in 1675. And it's only occurred to me doing this talk this week that perhaps the reason that Hackett and Fleetwood are commemorated in this window, which was put in the 19th century, is that Hackett, Lichfield and Worcester are the 2 dioceses with which Holy Trinity has been a part over the years. And then obviously I'll talk about this a bit later, but we then came into Birmingham diocese when that was created. So I wonder if that's why they've made that link with bishops in the, if you like, in the local, with a local connection of some kind. I said that was the final section. That was rubbish. The final section is actually, of course, the Ryland Bedford dynasty, as we tend to refer to them. The family that had the living, and so the rector's role, if you like, was passed from father to son from the 1600s until the beginning of the 20th century. And what I wanted to do here, because I can't do justice to the whole line, and there's lots written about them in our history book, and all sorts of other places. And of course, one of them, William Kirkpatrick, Ryland Bedford, wrote a book about the family living up to his time. So I just wanted to focus tonight really on William Ryland Bedford, who is perhaps less well known, and he was the father of William Kirkpatrick, who was the longest serving and wrote a lot and was very active in the town, and so is quite well documented, if you like. William Ryland Bedford has several points of interest from his role, as rector. First is that actually he inherited the living, or the patronage, or whatever you want to call it, from his mother. So Richard Biss Ryland was his grandfather, and this is the chap with the splendid wig down here. This is aged 25 he was. He died in his 50s and had no son to inherit. So the living then passed to his brother, who is the other bewigged one we love, and who was the one in old age. It nearly set fire to himself because the wig caught fire. That's John Ryland, his brother. And when John died, his son declined the living, so it reverted back to Richard's family. No boys, but he had 2 daughters, both of whom had married clergymen. So the older daughter had married a William Bedford, who was a clergyman. And so their son, William Ryland Bedford, then joins the dynasty, if you like, and comes to Sutton Coldfield and brings the Bedford name into the family in 1822. The other sad thing about William Ryland Bedford is that his death was from a stroke in Temple Row in Birmingham. He travelled in. The story goes that he was very exercised with a lot of projects going on in Sutton, including the building of St John's Church, Warmley. He had been quite shocked and upset at the death of his good friend Charles Barker, who was the headmaster of Bishop Beese's grammar school, who had gone off for a ride and the horse came back and he was found dead in Sutton Park later on. So, you know, there was various things going on in his life which may not have helped his health. But on the journey from Sutton into Birmingham, there was he actually hit a pony with his carriage, and the chap on the pony sort of had an altercation with him, and it was supposed to have ended amicably, but obviously this may not have helped him, and he sort of collapsed in Temple Row. He was there with his wife and died subsequently the same day, and she was with him. So that's all quite sad. And what I wanted to do was to just read you the very short press cutting about that death, which starts as follows. Deceased was 48 years of age and in possession of a very valuable hereditary living, in other words, being rector of Sutton Coldfield. He was a magistrate of the county and had generally taken an active part in magisterial business. He has left a widow and 5 children, to one of whom, who is at Eton College, appears he had written a letter on the morning of his death before he left home. But of course, that was William Kirkpatrick, who was only 17. The lady of deceased, whose grief may be conceived but not described, remained by his side until his death. And I just think that's so lovely, the way they sort of were rather sort of didn't dwell too much on the fact that this poor woman had been there when her husband died, and sort of didn't go into how awful she must be feeling. So the press could be sensitive sometimes. So poor old William Kirkpatrick was too young to take up the job. Obviously, he was still at school. And so at this point, if we go back to Richard Biss Ryland and his 2 daughters, the other daughter, who had also married a clergyman called Reverend Williamson, her son Richard, who was the cousin of William Ryland Bedford, then was asked to become the rector, which is why we have someone with a different name, but he is part of the family. And Williamson was headmaster of Westminster School, and he had to really give that up after a couple of years of being a rector in Sutton. But he did a tremendous amount for the town, and one of my favourite things is that he actually set up the first library there. So that I always think he clearly was keen on education, and his speech when he opened the library makes much of that. You know, he'd been a head teacher, and he was keen on everybody getting a decent education. Having got to William Kirkpatrick, I'm not going to dwell on him, but actually just to take you to the end of the Ryland Bedford era, where we have his son William Campbell Ryland Bedford. I think you see it just says WCR Bedford there, who got to the point where he realized that things were changing. There were all these new churches springing up in Sutton, and the Diocese of Birmingham had come into being, and really it seems it wasn't going to work for this family living to carry on, and so there had to be an act of Parliament called the Rectory Act in 1907, and obviously the rectory and rectory park was all tied up with that, and that went to the corporation, I think, at that point. But in William Campbell Ryland Bedford retired actually in 1909, so he stayed on for a couple of years, and then retired still sort of early. But I wanted to read a little comment from Harold Osborne, who wrote some memoirs about his time as a member of the church. And he said of William Campbell, he was above the average both in preaching and organising ability, and was popular with all classes and creeds. I rather fancy he saw a big job looming in the distance, which he had not the energy to tackle. So he decided to defer to the Diocese of Birmingham, and this brings in this gentleman here, who is Charles William Barnard, who became the first rector in the new of Sutton under the Diocese of Birmingham, and also, of course, the first occupant of what was the new rectory. It was an older building, which is the building next to the church in Coeshill Street. And of course, that, as we know, became has now become the Bishop's Lodge for the Bishop of Aston, since the rectory has moved elsewhere in Sutton. And there's a nice little comment from somebody who was living in Sutton in 1917 as part of the war effort, with the WAC in Sutton Park, and she obviously started attending Holy Trinity and wrote in a letter, which I'm going to read in a funny accent because it just seems to lend itself to that. I am getting to know quite a lot of people at Sutton, even outside the camp. The rector, Canon Barnard, has called and has introduced me to several very nice people who have called too. So I'm quite in the swim. What? So you can see why I read it like that. So this lady was writing to her fiance actually about that. So I think it just shows, he was obviously a very kindly person who took his pastoral duties seriously and visited people. And he had a big task, because he actually oversaw the period of the First World War, which must have been a pretty tough job in that, at that point. He retired in 1926 to Leamington, and sadly only survived 2 years. His wife had died previously in 1913, in fact. But after his death, his daughter gave the screen that is now divides the Vesey Chapel from the Vesey Aisle, which was all part of the major refurbishment of 1929 in the church, which Canon Barnard had started in 1914 with the painting of the the chancel ceiling, and then the war put a stop to all that, and so the rest of the ceilings were done, the Vesey Chapel was decorated, and various other things went in at that point. So it was rather a nice sort of completion of the work he had started in the church. So this is where we get to the from the clergy now to the parishioners. Okay, and I wanted to start with two contrasting rectors' wives, because obviously the women don't get as much of a sort of mention as the men. These are from different centuries and completely different things. But the first one, Barbara Elliott, Roger Elliott was the first rector in the 17th century of Holy Trinity. His wife Barbara died tragically young, and he gave silverware to the church in her memory. And the memorial plaque, this one here, at the east end of the chancel in the church, it's one of only 2 brass memorials commemorating burials in the chancel, and these are both of lay people, not the clergy. The other one being that of Josias Bull, described as a gentleman, but we don't know much else about him. The plaques were moved from the chancel floor when it was raised in 1875. So a lot of the memorials in that area again had been moved as the North Aisle ones were. So Barbara is depicted in Elizabethan dress, and she has her 2 children, Raphael, who was born in 1605, so just the year before her death, and he went on to become a priest. And then Elizabeth, who actually died either at or soon after the birth with her mother in 1606, as was so common in those days. But it's just interesting, isn't it, that these both children are on this sort of memorial plaque, and all rather poignant, really. It's something that was often done, because clearly this child is like almost like a child or an adult, even, in the way she's dressed. So the death was 1606, and Barbara was 24. The other rector's wife I wanted to mention, Mary Boggan. So John Boggan became rector literally at the end of the Second World War in 1945, and after his wife's death in the early 60s, he commissioned lovely stained glass window. I think it's one of my favourites in the church. I don't know whether other people agree, but it's so nice because the colour's so delicate and it still lets the light through. And Mary, she was Phyllis Mary Bogman, but I assume she was known as Mary. And this window depicts the three Marys of the New Testament. So you have Mary, and whose sister was Martha and brother was Lazarus, and who were friends of Jesus. And then you have the Virgin Mary, obviously, and then you have Mary Magdalene, who was the one of the followers of Jesus. So these three Marys are depicted in that window, and there's all sorts of other things going on there. But I just thought it was a sort of nice contrast of two of the women whose husband, and of course they, often, they did often die before their husbands, but there wasn't always that memorial to them. There is to the rectors themselves. And then I wanted to go on to a few some people who were associated as parishioners, but also writers with the church. So dear Miss Bracken, Agnes Bracken, and she is the one that was indeed on the front, the first slide. She wrote the history of the Forest and Chase of Sutton Coldfield in 1860, which is taken as the sort of first full history of the place. I've put this little quote in from Richard Holbeach, who is more of later, but he wrote this diary and wrote about her. A woman first, authoress, artist, antiquarian, philanthropist of the strongest individuality, this heart, such as Agnes Bracken, and I speak of her with respect and affection. That's a lovely tribute. And her paintings are in Sutton Library, I believe, or I think there's a collection of them, a book of them, and obviously the book is there too. And there is one of these blue plaques was put up by the Civic Society on the house in High Street, where they lived. So the family sort of came here in 1820. They were in Erdington first and then Aldridge, and the father died, and his widow Anne came with the four sisters, of whom Agnes was the oldest. So Richard also notes in his diary that they sat under us at services. The Miss Bracken sat under us, so this was in the box pews of the time, obviously, in church. And I must mention Janet Jordan here, because I don't know whether she's on the talk tonight, but Janet has done a huge amount of research about the Bracken family and Agnes and various other things that I'm talking about tonight. So I'm most grateful for all that she has put together and does. And I will mention her again, I'm sure. so thank you, Janet. Okay. The next big writers, because Janet has done a lot of research on the Holbeach family as well, and the reason the whole family in this case is sort of noted is because three of them wrote these they're called diaries, but they're really more memoirs of earlier days, and Janet has teased out all the sort of transcriptions of these and the stories behind them, and it's just wonderful what there is out there now about them. The Holbeach family, I think, is one of which I'm very fond, and I think other people who know about the history of the church are too, because they sort of seem slightly more ordinary than the bigwigs I'm going to talk about it in a minute. And of course, we do have all these lovely immediate recollections of what life was like in the town and about people in the town too. So the family starts with Thomas Holbeach and his wife Sarah, who both died in the 1840s, and had 14 children, of whom only all survived but one, Martin, who only lived for a year. So that is quite unusual in itself. Sarah was the oldest, and this is a picture that Janet has put in her research from Richard's diary. It's not attributed, but she thinks it probably is Sarah, but we have no other picture of her, so we hope that is Sarah, our Sarah. So that's not the mother was called Sarah, and Sarah as the oldest child. And then the second youngest in the family was called Helen, and these two in that generation wrote these diaries about their sort of earlier life. then Vincent was the oldest of the oldest son, and therefore the heir to the family, and he married Emma Addenbrooke, which was another sort of local name in Sutton. And Emma was the daughter of his partner in the family legal firm, and so that sort of cemented the work side of things as well. They were all solicitors, and Vincent and Emma had 7 children, including a set of twins. The third of these was Richard, who wrote the diary we mentioned earlier. Now, he, having seen what his aunts did, he then decided, when he retired from being a lieutenant colonel in the army, that he would write his memories of an earlier time. So in the 1890s, he wrote about the 1860s. And it's fascinating because there's all sorts about the churches and the town and all sorts of things. And he's sometimes quite blunt about what he thinks about people. I'm very grateful to Janet for this picture because it is actually hers and copyright. So it's not on the website, but I hope she doesn't mind me just including it because it's rather nice to see him in his military uniform. And then these pictures here have all come out of a book, as you can see, which is a history of the Holbeach family of Warwickshire and the Holbeach family of Farnborough, by Lawrence Ince. And he's put these pictures of the plaques in our church. So I thought it was quite useful to have them all together there. So here you've got Thomas Vincent, who is one of the sons of Vincent and Emma Holbeach. So this one is to the memory of Vincent and Emma, the parents of Richard, and so on. And then there were the 2 other older brothers than Richard, Thomas Vincent, and also Edward Addenbrooke Holbeach, who is on this one for some reason. Thomas Vincent gets his own plaque, and that's because he's the eldest son, I don't know. And then there was also this lectern given, which we have been using in the church ever since, really, which I think is rather, quite nicely carved. It's getting a little bit rough around the edges. And then this one too is Richard's memorial stone, which actually says on the label that it is in arts and crafts brass. So these are all on the south aisle of the church if you want to come in and look sometime. And then of course we have the Holbeach window, which Sarah gave not in memory of, because he was still alive, but in gratitude to Richard Williamson, who you recall was the Ryland Bedford family member who was sort of holding before William Kirkpatrick could take over. And it seems that he was, as soon as William Kirkpatrick was old enough, Richard Williamson was told, you can go somewhere else now. And I think Sarah perhaps felt that was a bit rough on him, and that after all he'd done, and maybe she even had a soft spot for him, who knows. But she had this window made, and that's the other window in the Vesey Chapel. So the bishop's window that we saw earlier is in the east end, and this one's on the north wall of the Vesey. Am I doing for time? I think I'm okay. Right. I just put these 3 people in the writers section because I just did want to acknowledge people who've been so helpful in research about the church and the people in it, and who've all now sadly died. So Norman Evans wrote his investigation, the one up here, which has been I think our major source really for church history, and he actually lived in Mainey, and then Margaret Gardner was a member of the church, although she actually lived in Wild Green, but a very committed and active member of the church with her family, and was the archivist for many years, and wrote many things, and also compiled the guidebook based on Norman's investigation that was in use for many years from 1987 until obviously we had the reordering, and we've done the new one now. And then Roger Lee, of course, who sadly died last year, just as our history book was published, and he wrote the foreword to that. But he's been a very, very good friend to the church in terms of helping us with history resources, and of course to the town with all that he's done, generally in Sutton, and the wonderful history spot collection. I think that there might be news about that at some point soon too, but I'll leave other people to talk about some other time. So I just wanted to acknowledge them particularly as sort of writers about the church. So we move on to what I call the bigwigs, which is a bit rude of me, but I wanted to start with the Pudsey family, who were descended from the brother of John Vesey, who was originally John Harmon. So his brother Hugo Harmon was the sort of the first line for Henry Pudsey on the left there. And this is probably why their rather elaborate memorial is actually next to Bishop Vesey's tomb in the Vesey Chapel now. You may have heard the story, and I'm going to repeat it because it's such a lovely one, about Jane Pudsey, widowed, had the memorial commissioned, and I suspect that these two busts or effigies of them were done before they died, because that was the usual practice, so that we had no photographs. But anyway, after Henry's death, Jane commissioned William Wilson, and I apologise for the quality of that picture. I can't find my better one. William Wilson was a very well-regarded stonemason and architect locally. He did a lot of prestigious buildings, and she commissioned him to do this and this memorial, and they fell in love, and so he built the moat house for them to live in, which is still standing next to Bishop Vesey's school. And when she died before him, she'd already got him a knighthood, which because he needed a bit of ennobling, as it were. And after she died, he said, "I hope that I might be allowed to be buried with her." And one member of the family, one son-in-law, was very against this. So dear old William suggested that he be buried outside the church, because this was the external wall at that point, so that because he was a stonemason. And I'm just going to read you the extract from the Warwickshire Worthies of the exact wording that he apparently used. Let me just find this page, where he said, "I will be buried on the outside of the church, directly opposite the vault where my wife lies, and there will be only a single stone wall betwixt us. And as I am a stonemason, there will be no kind of labour or difficulty in cutting my road through the wall to my old dead fellow." So isn't that lovely? He said he could come through. And the lovely thing is that after, in 1874, so he had to wait quite a long time, but in 1874, the clergy vestry was built on that outside bit of wall. So Wilson's memorial came inside and is now in that clergy vestry. And he appears to have been a lovely chap, because there's a very affectionate tribute from his friends in that memorial, which is this one here. And Henry Lord Folliot, who was a baron who married Elizabeth, one of the daughters, he seems to he had Four Oaks Hall built, in fact. And he had a family gallery built in the west of the church. But he and Elizabeth appear to have been much kinder to William than the husband of Elizabeth's sister, Anne, I think it was, in that Lord Folliot allowed Wilson to continue work as a stonemason, which is what he wanted to do after Jane's death, and they lent him some space at Four Oaks Hall to continue his work. So I thought that was rather nice. And Baron Folliot takes us quite nicely into Simon Luttrell, who Zoe mentioned in a previous talk. I don't know if you were there. His nickname was the King of Hell, which is pretty strong. And he was an MP, and it was because of his behaviour that's why he earned that nickname. And he bought Four Oaks Hall from Elizabeth Folliot after the Baron had died and following her death. Sorry, and he had the balcony a new balcony constructed. The old one came down, and he used to come in late to church with his family of eight children, and they would hold up proceedings until they were settled. But Simon Luttrell's other sort of interest is in his two daughters. So Anne, who is pictured here in this wonderful painting by Gainsborough, Anne originally married a man called Christopher Horton from Catton Hall in Tamworth, and then was widowed at the age of just 24. And she caught the attention of Henry, Duke of Cumberland, this chap here, who was the younger brother. Now, there we are. He was the younger brother of George II. Anyway, the first that the king heard of their marriage was a month after the event, when he had a letter from his brother saying he'd married Mrs. Horton and had gone off with her to Calais. So this actually led to a change in the law, the Royal Marriages Act of 1772, when George III decreed that no descendant of George II could marry without the king's express permission. So it was a bit late by then, but there we are. Now, Lady Anne had her sister was Lady Elizabeth Luttrell, this one in this picture, who had been a sort of companion to her for much of her time. But she actually was prey to gambling, and it sort of brought about her downfall. And in the end, there was massive scandal. She was convicted and sent abroad in disgrace, and then she was convicted of picking pockets and all sorts. And it appears she poisoned herself, is what they said. And a play was written about her called Bad Lady Betty. So it's all rather sad, really. So Simon, but what I've left in the middle here, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it while I've been wittering. This is the memorial to Simon Luttrell, which is in Kingsbury Parish Church, and I'm not quite sure why he ended up there. I did know, but I need to look that up again. But my goodness, you wouldn't believe that he'd had the reputation of being king of hell if you read all of this. It's absolutely extraordinary. So don't believe everything you read on a gravestone. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the Hartops. The Hartops are one of the other sort of illustrious families who are associated with the church, if you like. And Richard Holbeach wrote of them, "Verily, there are snobs of every degree." And he didn't like the way they always arrived late to church as well. It seems to have gone with the territory, doesn't it? Anyway, Sir William Hartop was much loved, I think. He was the first baron. By the time you get to Sir William Edmund Craddock Hartop, they're less keen on him. He was the one who was late. And Lady Hartop had this memorial put into the church, which is now in the Vesey Chapel. It's actually quite a lovely one. It's beautiful brass on the black stone. And she also gave various fixtures and fittings, which we know from press cuttings. And the famous one is a cushion she gave for the pulpit to try and soften the words of the preacher. But there we are. So that's the Luttrells and the Hartops. And of course, all these names will be known to you from the roads in Sutton, which are named after these people. My last little bit is just a sort of rather quirky one around wardens of church and town, because we have obviously the wardens who were part of the Warden and Society set up by Richard Beesey, and William Kirkpatrick Ryland Bedford did a whole list of these in his history book, which is a very useful source of information. And some people combined both roles. I mean, the people who were actually wardens of the town were, a lot of the rectors were. We also have people in professional life of various kinds, lawyers, doctors. Three of the curates, the long-standing ones at Holy Trinity, were Edward Glick, Joseph Mendham, and James Packwood. Packwood was the one whose memorial we saw right at the beginning. And both Hartops were warden in their time. So you know, a lot of people took that role on, you know, from all the professions, if you like, and occupations of the town. Church wards, of course, served the church, and some did serve both. In the Chavasse family, which is another name you might know from road names, there was a family of doctors mainly. Dr. Thomas Chavasse was a town warden, And Charles Edward Gervas was a church warden for several years, and he was one of the few that did not follow the trend of being a doctor. He was actually a wine merchant, but he is the one to whom this window here is dedicated, which is in the southwest or on the south side, with these rather lovely two-coloured panels here. So the Gervases are well represented. And then we have Joseph Duncombe, who inherited Moat House, the property which William Wilson had built. And this passed through various people associated with Holy Trinity who have plaques in the church. Joseph Duncombe was warden of Sutton in 1761. That's town warden, a capital Burgess, and a commissioner of the peace for Warwickshire. And his daughter Elizabeth inherited Moat House and married a lawyer by the name of Mr. Shirley Farmer Steele Perkins, which is a wonderful collection of names. And he himself was also warden in 1804. And I wanted to mention Elizabeth Duncan particularly because Janet Jordan again has now recently looked at the recipe book that has been found in America that Elizabeth Duncan created. And Janet brought this to our open day last week, so I hope you got a chance to look at it. But if you didn't, there may be more to come at some point on various websites. So all fascinating stuff. Two more wardens just to mention. The Sadlers, Richard Sadler and his son Richard. The older Sadler rescued the font that is now in Holy Trinity from St Leonard's over Whitaker. So it's obviously a much older font than the church. And Richard, his son, was also a church warden. So the Sadler name, of course, comes up a lot because they were solicitors. And Sadler House is where solicitors still continue to practice today. And finally, I wanted to mention John Skelton, who was a church warden from 1893 to 1919. Goodness, that's a long time. Overseeing a number of changes and events in the church. And he lived at the Knoll, this house up here on Coastal Street. And that features quite a lot in the history of people in the church. And I put that picture in because this is actually a photo by Harold Osborne, who I mentioned earlier. Who with his comment about William Campbell, Ryland Bedford, but he took a lot of photos of the area, and he actually lived with relatives who were the Skelton family in Knoll at that time. So I thought it was nice to have that picture. That is the house that was replaced by the townhouses just beyond the old rectory on Coastal Street, if that helps you to find where it was. And Skelton died in 1927, and so there is actually a memorial to him in the church, which is a screen between the chancel and the south chapel. That was all part of those 1929 refurbishment works which I mentioned earlier. So I think that is, you'll be relieved to hear, is all the people I wanted to talk about. Just wanted to put a few acknowledgements up there to various people who contributed information that relates to what I've used tonight, because I just put it all together. To be honest, a lot of people have done research recently or in the past, and I am extremely grateful to them. A bit more about how you can find further information. Don't forget, we have a very good website now with lots of heritage and history information on it, as well as other things. And I do also want to plug the two books that we sell, but we've got other merchandise as well. But we have both the guidebook now, which gives you like a glossy book, very suitable for a tour around the church, and then the history, which is a much fuller thing and a meatier read. And they're both available if you would like copies. That you get in touch. Zoe asked me to mention the concert series, which we are. I'm pleased to say reinstating this year, having had a fallow time with COVID. So the very first one is October the 9th, Saturday, October the 9th, with Lichfield Concert Band at 7:30. If you'd like tickets, you can get them online, or you can come into the Trinity Centre and buy them. I also was going to mention about opening the church. We had before COVID, been offering sort of sessions in the week when the church would be open. These were not very well attended, so we felt we've got to rethink this following COVID, and also the loss of volunteers for various reasons. So what we're doing now is we have a sort of notice board up in the church entrance, so that you can see that even though the church is locked, it will say if it is possible to go round on that day. So it'll say the church can be opened, you know, pop into the Trinity Centre opposite and someone will let you in. And if it just says it's closed today, it's closed today. There isn't anybody there to let you in, but we hope that will help people coming on spec, you know, to have a look round. But if you want to be sure, then do ring up the number which is on the website of the Trinity Centre, because then, you know, they can tell you when it's likely to be that somebody could let you in. And at any time, if you want a tour for a group of you, then just email me and let me know, because I can arrange for that to happen. So I hope that just gives you a bit more idea of how things are. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Stella. I've really enjoyed this evening's talk, and I can only encourage everyone who's here tonight, if you've not been around the church recently, to take up the opportunity to go and visit it now under these more flexible arrangements. Okay, so thank you very much, Stella. Thank you, everybody. I hope you all stay safe and stay well, and I see you all very soon. Good night.